Hi, Primary 6. Today we are going to take story, Time Twist, second term, and we are going to take the end of the story, of our story, okay? Chapter 10, Home at Last. Home at last, okay? Okay, we are going to finish our story. Let's listen to the story together. Chapter 10. Read well with me and pay attention.
Chapter 10. Home at Last. At the end of the day, Anton, Abby, Robert and Lucy stood outside the school gates. "Oh, what an amazing day," sighed Anton. "Yes," agreed Abby. "I never knew that school could be so much fun. Mr. Williams is so clever. I can't wait for school tomorrow. Can you, Lucy?" Lucy looked at Robert. "I think it is time we went back to our own time now," she answered quietly. Robert nodded. "We're really glad that your school is better now and that you have real teachers and books. But it is time we went back home to Grandad," said Robert. Abby and Anton looked sad. "He will be worried about us if we don't get home soon," explained Lucy. "Oh, we understand," sighed Abby. "But we will miss you. Thank you for helping us to improve our school. We couldn't have done it without you," said Anton. "Oh, I can't wait to read all the books in the library," sighed Abby. "I have already seen 9 that I want to read." "Oh, there will be plenty of time to read all the books in the library," laughed Robert. He took the time travel phone out of his pocket. "Have you got your phone ready, Lucy?" Lucy held up her phone to show Robert. "Ready," she replied, and turned to Anton and Abby. "Enjoy your school days." She gave Anton and Abby a big hug. Then she and Robert tapped in the password backwards. And pressed the green buttons on their time travel phones. Everything went dark. There was the sound of rushing wind. Then they were back in Grandad's study. Robert and Lucy put the time travel phones back on the desk and sat down by the fire. Just then, the study door opened and in walked Grandad. He was carrying a tray of tea. Mrs. Green was behind him. She was holding a big plate of delicious cakes. "We've brought you some tea and cakes," said Grandad. "Thank you, Grandad," said Lucy. "Those cakes look lovely, Mrs. Green." Mrs. Green smiled at Lucy. "I'm sorry I've been so long," said Grandad. "It took me a long time to mend the oven. Then I helped Mrs. Green make some tea. I hope you didn't get too bored." Robert and Lucy looked at each other. Grandad had been so busy in the kitchen that he had not realized that they had been on a big adventure to the past and the future. Robert grinned at Lucy. "No, Grandad," he said quite truthfully. "We haven't been bored. We found some things to do to pass the time." Grandad put the tea tray on a table and handed them both a cup of tea. "Have a cake with your tea," he said. "They're fresh from the oven." Robert and Lucy both took a cake from the plate. "They're delicious," smiled Lucy, taking a big bite. "I'll leave you to enjoy them," smiled Mrs. Green. She went out of the room and back to the kitchen. "Have you thought any more about your homework?" asked Grandad. "I think I am going to write about factory schools and the dreadful conditions children had to work in," said Lucy. "I'm also going to write about the people who weren't really teachers. Mrs. Bleak was such a horrible woman. I'm going to write about her." Robert stopped eating his cake and stared at Lucy. She suddenly realized what she had said. "Who is Mrs. Bleak?" asked Grandad. "And how do you know so much about factory schools?" Lucy blushed bright red. Robert shuffled his feet. Neither of them looked up. Grandad stood up and walked over to his desk. He picked up the time travel phones. That's interesting," he said. "The time travel phones feel very hot. How odd." He looked at Robert and Lucy. "Can you tell me why they are so hot?" Robert and Lucy felt very uncomfortable. Robert took a deep breath. "I'm really sorry, Grandad," said Robert. "When you went out of the room to help Mrs. Green in the kitchen, we thought we would test the time travel phones to see if they still worked. They did. We went back to 1840, when Queen Victoria was the Queen of Great Britain." "Yes," said Lucy. "We went to a factory and saw the factory school there. It was horrible." "What happened at the factory?" asked Grandad. So Robert and Lucy told him all about their visit to the Featherstone cotton factory. They described how they met George and Albert. They told him about nasty Mr. and Mrs. Bleak and how cruel Mrs. Bleak was to the children. Then they explained how Albert had his accident and how they told kind Mr. Featherstone the truth about his factory. Grandad listened to all they had to say. When they had finished speaking, he sat quietly. "Are you very cross with us?" asked Lucy. Grandad shook his head. "No," he smiled. "You should have asked me first, but I'm glad you told me what you did. I'm also very glad that you helped the children at the factory school. That was a brave and kind thing to do. What an adventure!" Lucy looked down at the floor. Actually," she muttered, "that wasn't the only adventure we had." Grandad stared at her. "Why? What else happened?" he asked in amazement. Robert gulped. "We went to our school in the future too," he said. "You've travelled into the future?" asked Grandad. "But the time travel phones have only been used to visit the past. It is dangerous to travel into the future." Robert and Lucy looked down at the floor. They felt ashamed about what they had done. "I'm sorry, Grandad," said Lucy. "Oh," Grandad sighed. "Oh, well, luckily you are back safely. Why did you travel into the future?" he asked. "When we went to the factory school, we realized that schools in the past were horrid. We know that our school today is very good," explained Lucy. "So we wanted to see what it would be like in the future. We wanted to see if it would be even better than it is now." "And was it?" asked Grandad. "No, it was horrible," replied Robert. "There were no books, and worse still, there were no teachers. Lessons were given by robots, and they were so boring." "So what did you do?" asked Grandad. "We found out where the books were hidden. Then we deleted all the files on the computers so the robots couldn't work. When the head teacher found out, he was very pleased. He asked all the teachers to come back to school," explained Robert. "Grandad, we are very sorry," said Lucy sadly. Robert nodded his head in agreement. Grandad sat back in his chair and stared at Robert and Lucy. Their heads were bowed and they looked very sorry. "Well, I'm glad you have told me everything now, and I'm glad you got the books and the teachers back into the school again." Robert and Lucy looked at Grandad and breathed a sigh of relief. They felt a lot better now they had told the whole truth. "But you must promise me," said Grandad, "that you will never use the time travel phones again unless I give you permission. And in future, if you do want to go time traveling, I will come with you. It is too dangerous for you to travel through time on your own. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandad," said Robert and Lucy. "We understand." Lucy gave her grandfather a great big hug. "Oh, you are the best grandfather in the whole wide world," she laughed. "I would love to go time traveling with you. I wonder what other adventures we will have together." "I think you should get your homework finished for your teacher before you two plan any more adventures." Grandad laughed, and he gave his grandchildren a big hug.
Now we have finished up chapter 10. We all know that the last chapter it becomes like a summary for what happened in the whole story. And of course we know that in this adventure story, we know that Robert and Lucy, every time when they use the time travel phone, when they return back to their granddad's study, they explain to him what did they see, and what did they have in their adventure, okay, and what strange things that they made, okay. In this story, they made two strange and adventurous things. They went back in the past, 1840, the Victorian age, and they traveled to the future. Okay, they made two adventures and two dangerous adventures. Okay, but because they are brave and they are curious, they returned back safely. Okay. Now, chapter 10. Home at last. In last chapter, the children wanted to go back to their time because their granddad will be worried about them. So they used their time travel phones and went back in time and turned it back to their granddad's house or study. After that, they told their granddad that they went back to 1840 and also wanted to see their school in the year 2050. So he said to them that if they wanted to go to the future again, he will go with them because it's too dangerous for them to travel through time alone. Okay, so he warned them and he was advising them. If they want to travel back in time or to make any adventures, they must take his permission and they must ask him first, and he will go with them, of course. Okay, it's a very interesting story. I like these adventures. I hope you too. Okay, let's answer the questions. What is Lucy going to write about? What is Lucy going to write about? If you remember from chapter 1, we knew that the two children had homework to do or something to write, an essay, a big paragraph, okay? A group of paragraphs is called an essay, okay? So they had to write a homework about the subject of the factory schools or the Victorian age. Okay, so Lucy decided to write about the factory schools and about Mrs. Bleak, as we read. Okay, so what is Lucy going to write about? About the factory schools. What is Lucy going to write about? About the factory schools. Number 2, why were the schools in the future boring? Why were the schools in the future boring? Because of the robots. Because of the robots. Okay. Number 3, what must the children promise? What must the children promise? They must promise never use the time travel phones again unless granddad gives them permission. Okay? They must promise never use the time travel phones again unless granddad gives them permission. Unless granddad gives them permission. Okay? Let's answer the questions below. Were Anton and Abby happy of their new school? Yes, they were very happy. Yes, they were very happy. Were Anton and Abby happy with their new school? Yes, they were very happy. Okay, what happened when Lucy and Robert tapped in the password? The sentence, the famous sentence that we know from the 3 years that we studied Robert and Lucy's adventures. Okay, what happened when Lucy and Robert tapped in the password? Everything went dark and there was a sound of wind rushing. Okay, everything went dark and there was a sound of wind rushing. Of course, all of us know this answer. Okay, did Granddad realize that they had been on a big adventure? Yes, he did, because they told him everything. Yes, he did, because they told him everything. Again, did Granddad realize that they had been on a big adventure? Yes, he did, because they told him everything. Okay, was it dangerous to travel in the future? Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, it was dangerous. Okay? Complete. Will be worried if Robert and Lucy didn't get home soon. Who will be worried? Of course, Granddad. Granddad will be worried if Robert and Lucy didn't get home soon. Okay, who helped to improve the school? Who helped to improve the school? Lucy, Robert, Anton, and Abby. Lucy, Robert, Anton, and Abby helped to improve the school. Okay, so who helped to improve the school? Lucy, Robert, Anton, and Abby. Granddad was glad because they helped the children at the factory school. Granddad was glad because they helped the children at the factory school. Okay, it's dangerous to travel into the future alone. It's dangerous to travel into the future alone. To travel in the future alone, or to travel alone, okay? Schools in the past were horrid and horrible. Horrid maybe equals horrible, yeah. Means unpleasant. You feel afraid when you are inside this school. Okay, this is the meaning of horrid. It's an adjective which means unpleasant. You don't feel happy and you feel afraid when you are in this school. Okay, horrid. So schools in the past were horrid and horrible. Horrid and horrible. Horrible means very, very bad. Okay, so schools in the past were horrid and horrible. Horrid and horrible. Number 6. It's too dangerous for children to travel alone. Anywhere. Okay? It's dangerous. It's too dangerous for children to travel alone. Lucy gave her granddad a great hug. Lucy gave her granddad a great hug. Okay? Thanks for listening. Good luck, inshallah. And I'm happy to finish the story with you. See you, inshallah, soon. Good luck and bye-bye.